As thinking individuals, we want to thrive and live the best lives possible. That means achieving and maintaining our health, but it also means achieving and maintaining our wealth. So we need to pay attention to the economic situation, not only in the individual countries in which we live, but also the larger global economic picture, because this has an important bearing on our ability to retain and safeguard whatever level of wealth we've so far managed to achieve. It is for this reason that economics and geopolitics must necessarily be a part of the spectrum of interest for the thinking individual. This week, it's a great pleasure to be joined once again by Rob Kirby, the proprietary analyst and founder of Kirby Analytics in Ontario, Canada. And he's going to give us his perspective on the current global developments and their implications for our financial security and our financial future. Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and welcome back to the show.
Nice to be with you again, Nigel.
I've heard that central banks, the buying of gold by central banks is at an all-time high, and I guess that you're going to confirm that that's probably Russia and China, and generally it's moving to the east. How is this not elevating the gold price?
Because the gold price, as it's reported to us, is the price that is determined on exchanges that trade in the paper markets, namely the COMEX exchange in New York and the LBMA in London. So while in the real market, in the physical market of gold, let's just say for every ounce of physical gold that changes hands, at least I'm going to say between 300 and 500 ounces of paper are traded on the exchange, on the paper exchanges, and in that fashion, the trading of the paper ounces overwhelms the relatively insignificant amount nominally of physical ounces that are changing hands. So it's sort of like if you can think of the physical trade in gold is like a pebble in a stream or in a raging river, and the pebble can be washed down the stream, even if the pebble doesn't want to go down the stream, it's carried down the stream or the river with the current.
Okay.
And the current is created by this ridiculous amount of paper trade. And that's been the case, and of course officialdom loves to report and loves to have the public banner that there's no activity, or that if one were to open the newspaper and look at the price of gold today versus the price of gold 3 months ago, the price today is lower, and this would naturally lead to the mainstream financial press reporting that nobody has interest in gold, or investor sentiment has been negative in gold because the price is down. Well, the reality, Nigel, in the gold market is that the physical demand for gold has never been higher, as evidenced by central banks having record purchases, and that's very accurate. But in the meantime, because retail demand has been crushed with this oversized selling of the paper ounces, they get to report that there's no interest in gold. And I mean, it's a very, very sad story. History books in the future will be written on this time period, Nigel, and history won't be kind to the keepers of our system, the people charged with being stewards of our financial system. History won't look upon them favorably. I can assure you of that.
No. So is it the same with silver? Because, silver, although it's up a little bit, it's sort of bumped along at just above sort of production cost levels, hasn't it, for so long? Is it the same with the paper trades in that commodity?
Nigel, it is often spoke about that silver is like gold on steroids. And I can attest to that. Silver is gold on steroids. So Silver is a much smaller market, and by dollar volume, a much smaller market. And I mean, silver is much easier to manipulate because it's a smaller market, and it encounters the same problem where sometimes in a day's trading on the COMEX exchange, the equivalent of a year's global silver mine production will be sold in one trading session on the COMEX exchange. It's absolutely ridiculous the amount of paper selling that occurs there as well. And silver physical silver bars, coins, whatever, in big volume is becoming increasingly hard for buyers to source and take delivery of.
In the collapse of our current monetary system, the sort of with the widely anticipated collapse, which I'm sure you can elaborate on, of the petrodollar, the dollar as the world's reserve currency, there seem to be a number of things that keep pointing towards the inevitability of the end of this era that began with the gold standard being ended in 1971. What can you tell us about, how much longer are we likely to have the dollar as the world reserve currency, given, what Russia and China are doing and with this gold movement to the east?
First and foremost, I know when people like me speak of an end of the dollar, petrodollar hegemony that America has enjoyed for all these years, ending, it sounds like a broken record because an awful lot of people say it, and to many people it might seem like very little has happened and things remain the same on a day-to-day basis. But the reality is things are not the same, and things have been changing. It's just that the change is not widely reported to begin with in the mainstream Western financial press. But the kind of changes that we are seeing, Nigel, is we're seeing countries, oil producing countries in particular, have been selling crude oil in other than dollars. I mean, we have Venezuela, and isn't it funny, the countries that are doing the selling of crude oil in other than dollars seem to be the countries that America has the biggest issues with. Because if we go back through the checklist of countries that have dared to offend America by selling crude oil in other than dollars, we can start with Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We can move on to Libya. We can move on to Russia. We can move on to Venezuela. We can move on to Iran. None of these countries have broccoli or asparagus as their number one national exports. They tend all to have the energy complex as the unifying element. And as these countries sell their national wealth in other than dollars, it creates strain on the petrodollar. So more and more countries are engaging in this type of activity, and some people, like myself included, would speculate that even Saudi Arabia is very likely doing some deals for Saudi crude, possibly with China in other than dollars.
Given we've got all these countries trading outside of the dollar, what is the main resistance that wants to hang on to the dollar as the main reserve currency? Obviously, there are the vested interests. Is there influence coming from London, the sort of old British Empire, sort of pulling strings behind the scenes, or is it just America?
Well, I mean, the current dollar-centric global financial system, I view it, and I've always viewed it as the Anglo-American banking clique. So you can't speak of America, in isolation when you're talking about the global reserve currency. I mean, let's just say at least up until there may or may not be a Brexit decision, London has had a very incredibly important and maybe the most important position in the financial universe. And I know that coming from a career in international brokerage, that London is basically the heartbeat of international capital flows, and for a host of reasons. But I mean, but you can't deny the fact that it is. So I would say the current world order, as we know it, absolutely has a very vested interest in things remaining much as they are. Sure. I mean, whether it's from a dollar-centric standpoint or really from a gold standpoint, I mean, I don't think the London establishment would like to have the public become very aware and have complete transparency in the criminal and fraudulent nature of the trade that goes on in gold, for instance, in London. So these are things that are kept conveniently off the front pages and out of media's attention, and like the more opaque these markets can be made, the more plausible deniability all those involved have. So it's no wonder that we don't get a clear picture on much of this. And understand, Nigel, this, when you're talking about the failure of a currency regime, it's a very major event, on the timeline of humanity, because it just doesn't happen that often, and the upheaval that can be created when such a thing happens is absolutely enormous, and oftentimes, in history, when there's been a change in currency regimes, it's often accompanied by enormous military conflict, and nobody in the right mind wishes for military conflict and the perils that come with that. So yeah, but it's a very I mean, the fact that it's coming is as sure as the pound was replaced by the dollar, and the dollar will be replaced by something. Yeah. And working out the details in terms of exactly what replaces the dollar, it's open for some conjecture, but I don't necessarily believe it's going to be something of the current Anglo-American banking establishment's picking, because I mean, they've shown themselves to be extremely poor stewards of the current system, and I don't think that anybody who has a say, namely the Chinese and the Russians and the Asian countries, are going to give them a do-over, because they don't deserve a do-over. Yeah. When you exercise very poor judgment, usually there are penalties to pay, and the penalty to pay, I do believe, in this instance, will be they will have much less of a say in what follows the dollar regime. So, and my best guess is what has to come is something that is backed by physical stuff. Yeah. Because that to me makes sense. Because nobody's going to put their faith, at least in my view, nobody's going to put their faith in another pure fiat regime very quickly when the current one is clearly failing. So monetary units, in my view, will have to be convertible into real stuff. And at the top of the list of real stuff that serves well as money, because history has shown us that it has thousands of years of doing just that, will be gold and silver. They would be at the top of the list. But I'm not suggesting for a moment that we're necessarily going to return to a pure gold or a bimetal standard, gold and silver. It may be a basket approach. There may be a precious metals component. There may be an energy component, as in a percentage of a barrel of oil. There could be an agricultural component to the basket as well. Maybe it's a percentage of a standardized bushel of wheat or some other agricultural staple. But I mean, change is coming, and denial that change is coming, in my view, is basically evidence of people not paying attention to what's going on currently in front of our very eyes.
You spoke of the paper trading in gold and silver, and only a tiny fraction of monetary trade, if you like, is actually to do with goods, the currency exchange, if you like. In order for a company to buy and sell commodities in another country, obviously we have to have currency exchange. But there's an awful lot of speculation in that market, isn't there? And I guess that's all about the bankers, isn't it? Because the bankers are right on that one. Is that all to do with this resistance to change as well?
Banks, when they trade, Nigel, they the nature of treasury operations inside banks is that when they trade, they build their balance sheet, and there is something in the institutional markets for institutions to crow about having the biggest balance sheet. I've been employed in it, and I understand what goes on there, and some of it is not even. Some of it's not even worthy to mention in an interview like this, because I mean, some of it's immature and childish.
Let's look at where Trump is and the Venezuela issue you mentioned there. Obviously, their oil and the sort of the shenanigans we've had just recently. Will the US intervene in Venezuela or not, given the chaos that they're experiencing there? Again, Trump sort of elected, and the wave of euphoria, lots of people optimistic that he's going to be the one that actually changes something. Can he? And do you think he's mindful to? How much is he manoeuvring, for the sort of global best interest, if you like, or is he? Are his hands tied by the establishment, and does he have to sort of guard the petrodollar, as you mentioned earlier?
My view of Trump is that the establishment are scared of him because they don't control him the way they do and have others who have preceded him. Trump's win was an outside the box sort of event or happening. Trump wasn't supposed to win, and most people didn't believe Trump could win. Particularly Hillary Clinton, because she did not really run an effective campaign to ever have any hope of winning, and Trump campaigned very hard, but I mean, frankly, I view Trump's win as a fluke, and but the fact that Trump is not controlled by the mainstream directly has the old guard very, very nervous. Anything could happen. Like they don't know what he might do. But what they have done to try and alleviate that worry is they've basically surrounded him with, I'm going to call them neocons, because the people that are his closest advisors and the people that Trump has in key positions, I'm going to say, are all part of the establishment, whether it's Pompeo, or whether it's Mattis, who's no longer there, but all of the people close to Trump, to me, are all very connected to the mainstream financial world, and mainstream thinking, and but there's still this unknown commodity aspect with Trump. The other thing is, I don't think they have dirt on Trump. Yeah. So when you have dirt, when somebody has tragic flaws, like Hillary Clinton, for instance, with her Clinton Foundation and her missing emails. And there's a long list of things that have followed the Clintons around through their political lives. Barack Obama was a very conflicted individual for a host of reasons. George W. Bush was another conflicted individual, very much so, if you've done any research or reading into his background. And so these people are very malleable. These people are very susceptible to doing as their handlers want them to do, or else the dirt comes out on them. So they're easily blackmailed. And I believe that Trump is not easily blackmailed. There's very little. I mean, we've had a 2-year investigation into every aspect of Trump's life, and my heart of hearts tells me if there was anything whatsoever that he was doing dirty that he could have been charged with or for, it would have happened already. It would have happened some time ago. The fact that they've done this exhaustive background on him to the tune of however many tens of millions of dollars they spent trying to find, they couldn't find dirt under his fingernails. There's never been a president that's been that far away from the mainstream that's made it to this position of political power.
I view his presidency as quite exciting to watch for that very reason. Obviously, he's got plenty of money and then they can't buy him and these other sorts of factors as well. So where does that leave him? I mean, he to some extent, he's surrounded by the swamp that he was going to drain. And I mean, without this becoming a discussion solely about Trump, do you think he has, is he still tied, to this petrodollar? I mean, and these actions, going towards Venezuela and things like that. Who's behind that, and how will that all affect the timescale, if you like, of any financial unfoldings that we might be about to witness?
Well, there's two aspects to this. I like Trump because he's a refreshing change from the status quo of what we've known American presidents to be, at least for the last 20, 30 years. The scary part is that he's a refreshing change in that he's unpredictable. And when you speak in terms of Trump and the petrodollar, any action Trump might take regarding the petrodollar might be wholly dependent on who he last spoke to, because I think Trump is a person who will listen to reason, and anybody who puts forward a good, solid, reasonable case to Trump, I think they'll catch his ear. So, what's good and what's bad about Trump is that he's not married to any dogma, at least the way it appears to me. Trump is not a dyed-in-the-wool globalist, at least in my view. I think Trump is wary of globalism, and he's much more of a nationalist, which I think is a good thing. But does that mean that Trump wouldn't listen to one of his closest advisors if said advisor was explaining to him that a crash of the petrodollar was imminent, and what that it could imply for America, which would be a diminished position in the world, in world standing? So, how would he react to such news or such advice? He might do something that you and I would find very, very distasteful, if it was to, in his mind, to protect America, because he claims he's America first, to make America great again. I don't think America's ever going to be great again with the current currency they have. So, I mean, my view is abandon it and get on with something that works, because the current dollar system, in my view, has shown itself over and over again that it's an unworkable, it's a completely unworkable system.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that America's pushing countries to accept dollars is actually driving them into a position of isolation on increasing basis, like in inflicting countries around the world or telling countries around the world who they can and cannot trade with and under what terms, or whether you get a pass to trade with X country or Y country. Like, I know America has nuclear weapons, but other countries in the rest of the world also have nuclear weapons. The rest of the world is not going to listen to America dictate the terms of international trade forever.
No. And they already aren't they? I mean, with the BRICS nations, you mentioned, at the start of our chat about increasing numbers of countries already trading in countries in currencies other than the dollar. So how have I can only assume, I don't know first-hand knowledge, that the BRICS nations have been trading outside of the US dollar. Can you tell us, and do you know any details about that?
Yes, it has been going on. And it's increasingly going on, and it will in the future continue to increasingly occur, because countries do not want to be told by America who they can and cannot trade with, and especially when countries have established trading apparatus in place with countries already. As in, currently, the latest thing in the news just today, there's a talk about America revoking waivers, as in certain countries have been allowed to buy oil from Iran, but America's got Iran on a no-no list, and so the talk today has been that they're going to revoke the waivers, and so countries that were formerly buying oil from Iran are going to be told, no, you can no longer buy oil from Iran. Well, I mean, it's one thing to tell, maybe Ecuador they can't buy oil from Iran. It's a completely different thing to tell China or India they can't buy oil from Iran. This is America talking to other sovereign entities, saying you can no longer do trade with this country. And I mean, the whole notion of it becomes quite absurd. This has and must lead to more isolation for America and their currency, and rejection of their currency.
Yeah.
And Nigel, this will only hasten the drive for a new global currency. And a currency reset.
It makes me, and I'm sure plenty of others, wonder, how's it gone on so long? What still holds it up? Because I mean, not only have we got the huge debt burden of $21 trillion or whatever it is, I've also heard reports that there are trillions of off books dollars, if you like, created, and this begs the question of how is the inflation hidden? And to the ordinary layperson such as me and probably many listeners that sort of take these sort of snapshots of global news, which is mainstream news is a load of nonsense anyway. It's all very misleading. How do we understand that what's holding it up?
When you speak of how is the inflation hidden, well, to begin with, we can immediately talk of $7 trillion that's been used over the last 12 years or so, blowing things up in the Middle East. $7 trillion has disappeared into a black hole called military adventurism. None of that money was left to bid the price of goods up in the American economy domestically. I mean, other than defense contractors have done very, very well over the last dozen or 15 years, if you've been paying attention to their share prices as traded on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or wherever else they trade. I mean, they've done very well. But I mean, profiteers but that's the whole nature of when you've got criminals in charge of the monetary apparatus. There's going to be big winners, and the average guy doesn't do so good. And I mean, that's a picture of America over the last 15 years. Absolutely, it's the story of America over the last 15 years. So, you know, wages for workers haven't gone up, but the remuneration for corporate CEOs and people who really have their nose in the trough, they've made out like bandits, and that's very, very much what you'd expect to see happening in a very corrupt system. And the system we have now is extremely corrupt because we don't even know how many dollars there are in existence. We have no clue. Because the reporting of people like Catherine Austin Fitts, Dr. Mark Skidmore, who identified at least $21 trillion unaccounted for from two government agencies between the period of 1998 to 2015. That's money that was on the books of Department of Defense and HUD that has literally disappeared into the ether. There's some people say that because they can't see them and point to them, these dollars never existed. Well, they did exist because they were on the books of those agencies, and they've disappeared, and with no accounting. And when the American government was called out on this, the first thing the White House did was to order a complete audit of the Department of Defense. And that was the first time in the history of DOD that a full audit had been ordered. And it wasn't much longer than 3 or 4 months after that audit began that the financial regulatory agencies in America basically gave the United States government federally a waiver from reporting the true financial condition of their books, basically excusing them from accounting if it was deemed to be in the interest of national security. So now you've got the behemoth U.S. federal government operating in an environment where they don't have to show their books. The American government is the only sovereign government in the world that I know of that does not have to have accounting.
Yeah.
They have literally been excused from accounting. And I'll tell you something. As the keeper of the world, or the stewards of the world's reserve currency, it's one thing if Uganda is doing this, but America is the steward of the world's reserve currency. So that impacts everyone in the world. It impacts, the implications are staggering. And here again, this to me only hastens the demise of the current regime, the dollar regime, and it underscores the need for a new global reserve currency regime, and it hastens the demise of the current system. And to me, this can only lead to, once again, more isolation for America. Yeah. Do you want to do business with somebody who doesn't have accounting?
What about the fact that if the sort of deep state, the establishment are concerned about Trump, he's obviously got a lot of enemies. Some might argue that if the bankers, whether it's the Rothschilds that own all the banks, I don't know, I'm just speculating there, but if the powers that shouldn't be don't like Trump, is there any argument that they might try to collapse things on his watch, or do you think their own vested interest effectively is a higher priority, and they'd rather just contain him and try to keep the whole can being kicked down the road for as long as possible?
My best guess, Nigel, is that they have him surrounded by neocons as his chief advisors for a reason, to try and keep him on the reservation, so to speak. I mean, and I guess at the end of the day, they could also have him killed. Yeah. If they decide that that's what they have to do. But I think what they also might be trying to do is create like an anti-Trump, controllable or controlled opposition person to run in the Democratic field with hopes that they can replace them in 2020. Okay. But I mean, here again, it comes back to Trump is unpredictable, and they've got themselves the globalists or the deep state, in my view at least, they've got themselves into a bit of a jackpot now, because getting rid of Trump is becoming, at least in my view, it becomes a bigger problem, or it becomes more problematic as time goes on, because the guy has a core base of support. And if they do anything untoward to Trump, I mean, like, America, in my view, could devolve into a civil war, or who knows. But there would be rebellion in America if Trump was seen to be being dealt with in a way that didn't sit well with his core supporters.
Does that leave open, or to put it another way, is there any credibility to the idea that they could use financial mayhem or recession collapse, whatever we call it, to try and oust him, say, right, well, that was his fault, happened on his watch? Is there any credibility to that, or do you think that the powers that shouldn't be underneath the surface do have a greater vested interest in propping up the system as long as they can?
I think all options are on the table, and where this goes, nobody really knows for sure, other than the status quo, in my view, is very long in the tooth and can't continue indefinitely, because what has been occurring in terms of the status quo, it's not sustainable. So there's going to be change. What ends up being the nature of the change is especially when you have a wild card like Trump, and Trump's actions, like I said earlier, Trump's actions may very well be, predicated on who talks to him last.
Yeah, sure.
And who makes the best argument last to him before he takes bold action. Mm. So, but one thing I think Trump is capable of, I think he is very capable of bold action, and I think he's very capable of doing things that nobody would expect.
Yeah.
As long as a very solid case, rational case was made to him that this was the necessary direction to go in.
Yeah, we've got China having bought a colossal amount of gold then over the last 15 years, probably more than that. The sort of history of the huge trade deficit, it seems to sort of balance, doesn't it? All the precious metals, the real stuff has gone over to China. How will that affect the scenario, sort of new currency? I know you haven't got a crystal ball, but using your superior knowledge here, how do you see that playing out? Will China and have a greater say in the game, in the new set of rules, if you like?
Well, that's going to largely depend, Nigel, on or could end up depending on whether America actually has the gold they claim to possess. I mean, America claims to possess 8,000 or so metric tons of gold. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been a credible audit done on this gold since the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s. So, if America actually has the gold that they claim to have, would America, under that scenario, possibly welcome gold as a part of a new currency regime? Possibly. I'm very dubious of the notion that America has the gold they claim they have. I rather suspect they have very little or none of their own gold. We know that their central bank, the Federal Reserve, has gold of other countries in trust that they safe keep at the Federal Reserve in New York, and America allegedly stores other nations' gold at West Point, New York as well. But very, very interestingly, it was only a few years ago that Germans asked if they could just audit the gold that the Federal Reserve had on, were safekeeping for them. And when the Germans asked if they could come in and look at it and test it and make sure it was all good and real, the Fed told them no, you cannot audit your gold that we have. And they claimed that they didn't have enough room for the Germans to come in and perform this task.
Yeah.
Well, that's a dog that doesn't hunt, because if you're in the business of vaulting gold, you have facilities for gold to be assayed and inspected, because that comes with the business. So after the Fed told the Germans that they could not audit their gold, the Germans said, well, if we can't audit our gold, maybe we'd like some of our gold back. And they were immediately told, no, you can't have your gold back. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a reason.
The smell test is very much points to the fact that there isn't any gold there, doesn't it? The United States has no gold, then, or very little gold, should we say, or not as much gold as they claim. They're definitely going to be, or they're going to lose a huge amount of significance on the new sort of chessboard, if you like, of the global geopolitical situation with the new.
But you see, Nigel, here you're dealing with globalists. And this is the part that scares me and makes me worried. To me, the globalists are the biggest danger to humanity that humanity has ever known. And these are people that are very sick in the head, okay? Because these are people that have been engaged in a completely and utterly criminal, fraudulent, fallacious currency regime where they've been basically screwing the world over for a lot of years. And so now that the game is looking like it's going to wind up, maybe they just say, we've got bunkers built and we have nukes, and we're going to play the nuclear card now, and we're going to go and hide like cockroaches in our bunkers. You see, I don't put that past the sick human beings that globalists are for a minute. These are people that have been behind some of the biggest bouts of genocide we've seen, in our world. These are the people that were behind funding Hitler. These are the same people that have propped up and funded totalitarian dictatorships. These are the people that put Mao in power. These people do not like us, Nigel. These people don't care if they liquidate 3,000, maybe like a la 9/11. They don't care if they liquidate. I mean, they view. I mean, we are. I guess one of the more famous globalists of our time, possibly someone like a Henry Kissinger, who refers to us as useless eaters. And that's pretty much the way they view us. And these are people that will stop at nothing to have their wet dream of one world government, one world currency, and one world religion, which is the worship of state itself.
That's quite a good lead into cryptos there, talking about one world currency. Let's just take stock of the crypto situation. Obviously, there's been quite a turnaround. Bitcoin, I believe, is worth currently, at the time we're recording this, around about $5,500, I believe. So it's had something of a big recovery and a turnaround since its lows of just over $3,000. The whole crypto market seems to be coming alive. The volumes being traded are looking encouraging. How does this play in, do you think?
Well, I mean, the whole crypto thing, in my view, is another wet dream of the globalists. In that you look at it, like in the last 2 or 3 months, Nigel, Bitcoin is up, call it $2,000, backed by nothing, and gold, which owes no one nothing, which has stood the test of thousands of years of being indestructible money that retains value, is down $30. So you don't really need to say much more than that. You know, if you want to just look at the last 3 or 4 months, Bitcoin up 2,000, gold down 30. Yeah. Just the way you'd expect the globalists would want it.
Well, this is interesting because it raises another question. I mean, I would offer that Bitcoin does have a use case. It has value potentially. Whether it's Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency, the potential use case to trade, at lightning speed with somebody on the other side of the world, it definitely has some value. But the main question I want to ask you is does this mean? And I've heard a lot of others speculate this that the cryptos are basically a tool of this sort of deep state, these globalists. Is it the global currency, being sort of introduced through the back door, or is the whole concept of cryptocurrency and indeed the potential to privately exchange value for value across the planet, is that a striking a blow for freedom of the individual, or is that another step down the road to a globalist culture? Well,
the answer to that, in my view, is possibly. I mean, and when I say possibly, the one thing we know about Bitcoin, for instance, is that it allegedly and supposedly has a very finite supply. We can't say that for the US dollar. In my view, Nigel, Bitcoin would never be the crypto of choice for the globalists on a go-forward basis, because they want something that they control the supply of, not something that has a finite supply. But all that being said, can cryptos be applied to real stuff? And can cryptos be backed by things? Yes. The case of Bitcoin, I'm gonna say that there is no backing for Bitcoin in that. And when I say no backing, it's not officially backed by anything. And what you can buy with your Bitcoin at any given point in time is going to be wholly dependent on the counterparty, whether they wish to exchange Bitcoin for whatever it is they have. But there's no official depot, as in when we were on the gold standard, you could exchange dollars at $35 an ounce. You could surrender your dollars and get an ounce of gold for $35 American. There's no official exchange rate set anywhere for any of the cryptos. Well, I shouldn't say for any of the cryptos, because there are some specialty crypto, actually precious metals cryptos that are in existence now. Do I see an application for cryptos in the world going forward? Yes. But I think the applications that are going to be successful are going to be ones that are backed and convertible into something tangible. And from that standpoint, I don't really see Bitcoin being the preeminent crypto going forward. No. To me, the Ethereum model probably lends itself, because Ethereum, or an Ethereum-based model, can accommodate smart contracts, and it's much more adaptable to the convertibility factor, convertibility into tangibles factor than Bitcoin is, because you can back Ethereum-based applications are much more easily backed. The one thing about crypto, anything that's digital can be erased. So, if you want to cut people off from doing things, or if you want to surveil people and take away their ability to do things, all you have to do is digitally erase what they have.
Sure, but would that not depend on? And I take your point that the globalists would like to obviously control whatever cryptocurrency, they'd have their eye on becoming a global currency. But what about MaidSafe, PivotX, Monero, whatever? These allegedly private coins, and just the technology, not specifically any one coin, because the technology is developing, of course. But what about the idea that you and I, for example, could trade? I could pay you for something, you could send me some value, potentially without anybody knowing. Do you think that is likely, or do you think that's impossible? The encryption and all that, it's just not going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we could go either. Again, the answer is possibly, because I think right now in the cryptoverse, you can exchange value anonymously. But if the globalists have their way, I think the odds of that quality remaining in the cryptoverse diminishes, because the globalists want to be able to surveil everything.
Yeah.
And they feel it's their right to be able to surveil us on everything we do and all aspects of our life. So there's some work to do in the crypto area, but do I see the globalist entity possibly getting behind it? Look, to a certain extent, Nigel, they are behind it. We know they're behind it, and the proof is staring us in the face. The last 3 months, Bitcoin's up over $2,000 and gold's down 30.
Yeah.
So clearly, if the globalists were dead set on not having a crypto world going forward, they can put this fire out anytime they want. Okay, because it's the globalists, in my view anyway, that knocked Bitcoin and the cryptos off their perch, and created somewhat of a panic in the sell down. But they didn't take it to zero, but they did crash it, because the run up in the cryptos, in my view, was becoming manic, and the globalists are very concerned and get very worried when they see manic rises in anything, unless they control it completely. And I don't think they had control, for instance, of Bitcoin completely. I know that they've had their oar in the water, so to speak. I know they're players in it, but I don't think they had complete control of it. And, knocking it back a few pegs it's been sobering for a lot of people, and it's given the globalists time to scheme and make new plans, which clearly they've done, in my view anyway. And I can see that. I just see the heavy hand of officialdom everywhere I look in the capital markets. Yeah. To me, there's very little in the capital markets that makes any sense at all. It was 6 or 8 months ago, everybody in the world, Nigel, knew that interest rates were going up, and because they had to go up. And I said to people 6, 8 months ago, I was telling people, I don't believe rates can go up much at all, and any rise in interest rates will be nominal at most, because I think they actually are going to have to go lower, because the global economy is not growing the way it should in a normal recovery, and the recovery has been extremely weak and tepid. So, this is in fact what has happened. So from 6 or 8 months ago, when everyone knew interest rates were going up, now everyone says and knows they're going down. Like, look at the about face we've done in 6 or 8 months. So everyone had it wrong 6 or 8 months ago. And my question is, does everyone have it right now? At the end of the day, I don't know. My guess would be that rates are going lower.
Do you think that? Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, you see, the reality is the nature and the life cycle of global fiat money systems with compound interest, irredeemable systems with compound interest. They in their life cycle, growth is generally upward to the right at a very, very shallow pace, at a very, very minute level, until it inflects. And then money growth has to go vertical. Like it's like we call it the hockey stick. It inflects, and the growth rate of the money has to go vertical. And it's not really about what interest rates are. Any positive rate of interest will produce this inflection where money growth has to grow vertical. And I mean, lowering the interest rate just means you buy some time and you wait a little longer before you inflect. But there's no doubt in my mind we did inflect and have been on the inflected part of the money growth curve for quite some time. And you see, if you look at the work of Skidmore, Dr. Skidmore and Catherine Fitz in terms of how much off-book money has likely been created since 1998, I think you could make a very strong argument that we got onto the inflected part of the money growth curve very likely in the mid-double O's. And the Fed, these people model everything. These people are absolute junkies to modeling and knowing, they know everything about their money because, that's what they're specialists in, creating fraudulent money. And they model everything. So they knew they were going to encounter this inflected part of the curve, and they started creating extra money out of thin air and siloing it as early as 1998, because they knew that there was going to be rejection of the currency, because when you grow your money vertically, people who use it around the world will naturally reject it. They'll try to trade it for something else they view to be more sound and more tangible. And that's exactly what has been going on, because we can look at the data, we can look at the reserve positions of countries around the world, and we can look at the U.S. government securities dumps of countries at different points, ranging from China to Japan to Russia to the Saudis at different times. And isn't it incredible that whenever a country dumps major amounts of U.S. government securities, as China has done at different points in Russia over the past 3 or 4 years, the dollar never goes down. The dollar, and if anything, the response is that the U.S. government securities go down in yield, which means that it's like unfathomable selling is met with higher prices. Yes. Does that make sense?
Not
Unfathomable selling is met with higher prices. Okay? Foreigners are not participating the way they have historically at U.S. government bond auctions. Who's buying the bonds, Nigel? Yeah. Who is buying them?
Yeah.
The traditional buyers are not buying them. And America continues to issue record amounts of debt. Who is purchasing the bonds? The bonds are being purchased with money that's been created off book. And they're being memory holed or siloed. And the nature of what has occurred is so monstrous. It's so completely and utterly diabolically evil that most people just can't wrap their head around it.
No. And it must be a monstrous gravy train for all of those insiders, isn't it? When you're talking such large quantities of money, the odd suitcase full of money disappearing here and there.
Now, when you talk about the odd suitcase of money or the odd C-130 full pallets of freshly printed bills that disappears in Iran under Obama. Look, if money was that dear, if money was really, I mean, I find it incredible in America where they will sit around and have discussions about whether they can afford a certain social program or whether a certain venue or avenue of government spending is justifiable. And they talk like money is really dear about what they can afford when it comes to anything that has to do with the little guy, you and I. But I mean, hey, if somebody has a new plan to launch a new war or to spend 7 trillion in the Middle East, there's not even a second. Nobody ever says, "Can we afford to spend 7 trillion in the Middle East?" There's never a consideration. I mean, if anything, they're gearing up. It seems to me anyway, they're gearing up for possible intervention in Venezuela. Yeah. So, has there been any discussion about whether they can afford 2 or 3 trillion in Venezuela?
And yet you hear all that nonsense about Trump, trying to rattle his money box to build a wall around Mexico, where you think, well, if you've got a big, Department of Defense budget, surely a wall is to do with defense. But hey, that's a whole other story, isn't it?
The narrative is that money is dear, but all the actions by let's just say the powers that be, all the actions that we see them engaged in on a macro level tell a story that's completely and utterly the opposite. I mean, money is no obstacle to America when you can create money out of thin air.
Absolutely. And there is the problem, isn't it? As you say, we need a system that's actually backed by something or a range of things, as you mentioned earlier.
There's no discipline in global monetary affairs right now. There is absolutely no discipline, and there has to be discipline.
To sort of sum all this up for the layperson, the interested observer who's trying to make sense of their world and look out and safeguard their own financial interests, looking after our families and our assets. I know that you're going to say gold it must be a part of that portfolio, mustn't it? I mean, do you want to elaborate on that? I mean, because it's all about finding solutions, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. To me, ownership of some physical gold, some physical silver makes a lot of sense. Even if you want to look at it just from the standpoint of insurance. I mean, anybody who owns a home, normally they have insurance in case it burns down. I view ownership of gold and silver as financial insurance for your portfolio, so that if the fiat component of your portfolio burns down, you're not left with nothing. You're not financially homeless. Yep. And from that standpoint, ownership of some physical precious metal makes a lot of sense. But ownership of maybe some storable food makes some sense. In case we're hit with, I mean, if the currency system runs into really bad problems, there could be a breakdown in logistics or supply chains. So having some storable food might make some sense. And how much does one engage in any of these things? Really, it can only be measured on a case-by-case basis, because I'm not an advocate or a proponent of people taking their grocery money and buying gold or silver with it. So, you've got to weigh your own circumstance and look at your own circumstance before making decisions like this. But absolutely, as a part of a diversified portfolio, ownership of some physical metals makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
From your perspective of being in the know, are there any sort of events on the horizon that could, make any waves as we move into the summer of 2019?
Sure. I mean, there's still a lot of a great deal of confusion surrounding issues in your country regarding the
Brexit.
Which way you're going to go with Brexit, and the other thing. I mean, the other thing is, I guess, the metals itself. physical metals are becoming much more, despite the lackluster performance in the paper markets, physical metal is becoming much harder to procure for those that have intentions of doing so. So at what point do we have a public disclosure that people who are trying to buy or have contracted to buy are told you can't have the metal? And could that happen at any time? I would suggest yes, it could happen at any time, and that could be a bit of a wild card that could be played at any time at all. Additionally, sovereign finances, the sovereign finances of Italy are a mess. And the Eurozone itself, to me, is a very unstable structure. And I mean, could we see blowups in the Eurozone? We've seen, because we've seen a lot of difficulties being encountered, whether it's the Yellow Vest movement in France. Nationalist tendencies have been rearing their heads, not only in France, but in Spain and in Italy, and who knows where else, on the continent.
And Italy, I gather, signing a memorandum of understanding with China. I mean, it seems that they're sort of manoeuvring within the European Union in perhaps a sort of a manner that's disapproved of, shall we say, by the the centre of the club of Europe.
Well, yeah, there's that, and there's also the notion that the nationalist element in Italy had published something back just a few weeks ago where they spoke of Italy's sovereign gold being owned by all the people of Italy, being highly suggestive that if the nationalist interests were inclined, they could utilize that sovereign gold for their own aims, as in to further the plight of the little guy. That was met immediately with a pronouncement by Mario Draghi that that's untouchable.
Yeah.
So this is the head of the European Central Bank, ex-finance minister of Italy, and a globalist, dyed in the wool, telling the Italian people basically that you can't touch the gold. Makes me wonder if the gold's really there.
Are there any further points, do you think, that need to be said to sort of illustrate as much as we can of the global financial position? What's likely to happen, for thinking people out there that may be viewing us?
To me, people who think we're living in interesting times, my response is hold your breath, because things are going to get a lot interesting in the very near future. I can say that, and I'm pretty sure I'll be correct. And time will show that indeed is the case.
Yeah.
So
hold on to your hats, strap in for a crazy ride, eh?
Yeah, because I believe, Nigel, things are going to get crazier before they ever get normal.
Okay, well, I agree wholeheartedly that diversifying the portfolio and getting hold of some precious metals just seems like a sensible thing. Some people might want to diversify into cryptos as well if they have any money that they can afford to lose. Of course, that's the main prerequisite there. But Rob, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your insight with us today. Massively appreciated. And just a reminder to any viewers and listeners that Rob can be found at kirbyanalytics.com, and you can subscribe to his newsletter there from Ontario in Canada. So Rob, once again, very big thank you for joining us today.
Been my pleasure, Nigel.
Great. And I'd certainly appeal to you all to visit the website lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more information on there on how to thrive in challenging times. So do check it out. And thank you very much for listening. And I hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
To see